I raised Elena alone. Her father walked out when she was 2, and from that moment on it was just me, Carolyn. I worked long nights as a nurse, barely slept, skipped meals, and gave up everything just so my daughter could have a shot at something better. I never missed a parent-teacher meeting. I never missed a birthday. I was there for every heartbreak, every scraped knee, every tear. When she got into college, I cried harder than she did, and when she told me she was getting married, I was over the moon. I started saving every penny, took out a loan to help pay for the venue, an estate in Georgia with white pillars, chandeliers, fountains, everything she ever dreamed of, everything I could barely afford. For 6 months, I stitched a quilt made of her baby clothes, her prom dress, scraps from the sweater I wore every time she had a fever. I wrapped it up with care and carried it with me that morning. I wore my nicest dress, got my makeup done, and showed up early, my heart bursting with pride. But when I got to the gate, a security guard stopped me, told me I wasn't on the list. I thought it had to be a mistake. Until I saw her, Elena, my baby, in white lace, standing beside her groom, Marcus, and smiling. Not at me, at Diane, his mother. She looked at me, held my gaze, then turned away. No wave, no explanation, no seat saved for me. I was the one who paid for that day. I was the one who raised her, and somehow I was the only one not allowed inside. What happened after that didn't just break my heart, it exposed something I never saw coming. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Carolyn. I'm 58 years old, a retired nurse, and I raised my daughter, Elena, on my own since she was a toddler. Her father left when she was barely 2. He never looked back, so I never had the luxury of falling apart. I worked double shifts at the hospital for years, night after night, saving lives for strangers so I could build a life for my child. I didn't have vacations or weekends off. I had bills, and a little girl who depended on me. Elena was my world. She was kind, driven, always the girl who shared her lunch with classmates who forgot theirs. She loved to write stories, used to read them out loud to me in bed. We used to laugh until we couldn't breathe. But about a year ago, something shifted. She got engaged to a man named Marcus, a man who, on the surface, seemed like a dream. He was 32, successful, well-dressed, and every word out of his mouth was wrapped in sugar. He called me Mom the first time we met, brought flowers, held doors. But after a while, I started to notice that whenever I asked Elena a question, she would look at him first. That wasn't like her. She started canceling our phone calls, said she was just busy. And then there was his mother, Diane. Elegant, always poised. The kind of woman who doesn't raise her voice but makes it very clear who's in charge. She came from money, old money, the kind that makes people feel small without saying a word. The wedding venue was in Georgia, a grand estate with white pillars, fountains, chandeliers, the kind of place you see in magazines, the kind of place we could never afford. Except we did. I did. I took out a loan. I used my savings. I told Elena this was her once-in-a-lifetime moment, and I would make sure it was perfect. But the closer we got to the wedding, the further away Elena became. She stopped calling me Mama. She started quoting Diane about etiquette, about presentation, about how certain people should behave. She didn't even invite her childhood best friend, said the guest list was tight. It wasn't just a wedding anymore, it was a performance, a stage where I had been pushed behind the curtain, but I still held on, because I believed that deep down she was still my daughter, the little girl who made me handmade cards every Mother's Day, the teenager who clutched my hand at her high school graduation and whispered, "We did it, Mama." This wedding, it wasn't just about her marriage. It was the culmination of everything we had been through, everything I had fought for, everything I had given up. So when I was turned away at the gate, it didn't just hurt. It shattered something in me I didn't even know could break. The week before the wedding, I hardly slept. I was hand-stitching a veil to match Elena's dress, tiny lace flowers that took hours to get just right. I knew she could have bought one, but I wanted her to have something made with love, something personal. I also stayed up one night writing my speech. I cried while typing. It was full of memories, first steps, spelling bees, our old apartment, and the little blue lunchbox she carried every day to school. When I texted her a draft of the speech, she just replied, "We'll see. Diane's working on the order of events." Diane again. Always Diane. Elena had started brushing me off more often. She'd say she was overwhelmed or that she'd already discussed it with Diane. At first I told myself it was just the stress. Weddings are hard, but it kept happening. I offered to help with centerpieces. She said it was already handled. I asked if her cousin Melissa could still be one of the bridesmaids. Elena snapped that the bridal party is set, and that Diane said too many girls would look tacky. It was as if every part of the wedding was slowly being taken away from me. Every idea I shared, every tradition I offered, shut down. Then came the guest list changes. I overheard Diane during the rehearsal dinner telling the planner that the final head count is down by 1. When I asked Elena what that meant, she said, "Oh, just trimming things." Diane didn't think some of the RSVPs felt appropriate. Some of the RSVPs? This was my daughter's wedding, and I had no idea who was even coming anymore. Marcus, the groom, also started making strange requests. He insisted on setting up a VIP-only entrance on the far side of the estate, said it would cut down confusion. I asked who the VIPs were. He smiled and said, "You'll know when you see them." But I never did. I brought up the seating arrangement one last time, nervously asking where I'd be sitting for the ceremony. Elena hesitated, then said, "Actually, Diane thought it would be simpler if you sat with the second group, just for spacing." Second group? I had paid for the chairs. I had chosen the flowers. I had sacrificed years of my life for her future. Still, I bit my tongue, told myself, "Don't ruin her day. It's not about you." But inside, something felt off, as if a script was being rewritten, and I wasn't allowed to read it. I had no idea that my name, my own name, had been silently removed from the guest list, and by the time I found out, it was already too late. That morning, I woke up before sunrise. I laid out my dress on the bed, the same pale blue I wore to Elena's college graduation. I ironed it 3 times. My hands shook as I did my makeup, not because I was nervous, but because I was proud. My little girl was getting married. I slipped on my flats and took one last look in the mirror, clutching the scrapbook I made, page after page filled with photos, letters, little dried flowers from her 5th grade science project. It was supposed to be my surprise gift to her, a reminder of the love that had carried us through. When I arrived at the estate, the sun was already high. Everything looked picture perfect. White chairs lined up under the trees, violins playing softly, guests in their Sunday best sipping champagne. I walked toward the entrance, heart pounding, gift in hand. Then a man in a black suit stepped in front of me. "Ma'am, can I help you?" I told him my name. He looked at his clipboard, then looked up again. "I'm sorry, you're not on the list." I laughed, a nervous, confused laugh. "What do you mean I'm not on the list? I'm the bride's mother." He didn't blink, just repeated the same words like he'd been instructed. "I'm sorry, ma'am, you're not listed." And then, like she had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike, Diane appeared, perfectly composed, her pearls glinting in the sunlight. She looked me over, up and down, then smiled with just the corner of her mouth. "I'm sure it's a mix-up," she said, her voice smooth like silk. "Maybe it's best if you head home and we'll give you a call after. It's such a delicate day." I didn't move. I looked past her, up toward the second-floor balcony of the estate, and there she was, Elena, in her wedding dress, laughing, standing beside Diane, holding a glass of champagne. She looked so happy, so calm. She saw me. I know she saw me. And she turned away. That was when my legs gave out. I sat down on the curb, dress creased, makeup running, scrapbook still clenched in my lap. Guests walked past me. Some looked away. Others gave small, awkward smiles. I felt invisible, replaced, forgotten. Then someone tapped my shoulder. It was Tara, Elena's childhood best friend, the same girl who used to sleep over at our apartment almost every weekend. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder before sitting beside me. "I shouldn't be telling you this," she whispered, "but they planned it." I blinked, unsure what she meant. Elena told Diane she didn't want any emotional chaos today. She said it would ruin the mood. So, they took you off the list, weeks ago. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just sat there, holding a gift no one would open, for a daughter who had already closed the door. I didn't go anywhere after that. I drove straight home, still in my dress, still clutching that scrapbook. I didn't even have the energy to take off my shoes. I walked into my living room and sat at the edge of the couch like I didn't belong in my own body. Everything felt frozen. The house was silent, but my head was loud. On the coffee table sat a small box I had pulled from storage a week earlier. Inside was the wedding cake topper Elena picked out when she was 9 years old. She'd seen it in a store window and said, "That's going on my real wedding cake someday." I kept it all these years, cleaned it up, brought it home from the venue in case it got forgotten in the chaos. Now it sat untouched, just like me. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat on the floor of my bedroom with the scrapbook beside me, scrolling through old texts. And that's when I noticed something. There were messages between Elena and Diane from weeks earlier, screenshots I had saved without thinking during the planning phase when we were all coordinating logistics. One text from Diane read, "Your mom always uses guilt to control you. Emotional manipulation. It's a pattern." Elena had replied, "I know. That's why this wedding has to feel clean. No drama, just a fresh start." I stared at that message for a long time. I must have read it 50 times, each word stabbing deeper than the last. Emotional manipulation? Guilt? Is that what she thought all those nights I stayed up holding her during panic attacks were? Was that what she called it when I skipped eating for days to send her grocery money in college? Was I just a burden in her mind? I started pulling old folders out of the drawer, the wedding budget spreadsheet, our shared planning documents, everything I thought we were doing together. But the files had been changed. I no longer had access to most of them. My name had been removed as a contributor. I called the florist. She said Diane had taken over all the payments. Then I logged into my emergency contact profile on the health portal Elena once shared with me. For years, I'd been her primary emergency contact. Now, nothing. My name had been replaced by Marcus. Even her life insurance beneficiary had been switched. I sat there, staring at the screen, remembering every overtime shift I picked up to pay her tuition. Every vacation I declined because Elena needed something. I sold my wedding ring so she could buy books for her first semester. I pawned the necklace my mother gave me just so she wouldn't have to take out another student loan, and in return, I had been edited out of her life like a mistake, like I never mattered. I didn't know what to feel the day after it all happened. There were no more tears left, no more calls to wait for, no apologies I imagined might come. I just sat in my quiet home, surrounded by reminders of a life I no longer recognized, a life where I had given everything, every breath, every dollar, every bit of my body and soul, to someone who now looked through me like I was a stranger. But something in me had shifted. It was subtle, not rage, not bitterness, just an end. The kind of ending that doesn't need music or yelling, just silence and a decision. So I got up from the couch, slowly, methodically. I opened the cabinet where I kept all the paperwork, wedding contracts, loan agreements, receipts from the vendors. I called the bank first. I asked them to remove me from the wedding loan cosign. They tried to talk me out of it. I didn't raise my voice. I just told them, I am no longer responsible for any of it. Then I called the venue, explained that the final payment I had promised would not be coming. When they asked why, I said, because I wasn't even allowed through the gate. I canceled the cake order, told the caterer I wouldn't be signing the check. I even emailed the photographer. Diane could take it from here. If she wanted control, she could have all of it. I wasn't being petty. I was reclaiming what little dignity I had left. But it didn't take long for the consequences to show up at my doorstep. Later that evening, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved, but I answered anyway. My hands were still shaking from going through everything. It was Marcus. His voice was cold, almost mocking. "So this is how you handle disappointment? By being vindictive?" I didn't say a word. He kept going. "You just proved exactly why we didn't want you there. Elena didn't need drama on her wedding day, and now look, you're out here trying to sabotage her life because you didn't get your way." His voice was smug, practiced, like someone who had rehearsed this speech in the mirror. He hung up before I could even breathe. I sat there, stunned, accused of being vindictive, by the man who stood beside my daughter while I cried outside her wedding gate. 2 days later, I got a knock at the door. A man in a beige jacket handed me an envelope. No return address. I knew what it was before I even opened it. A cease and desist from Diane's lawyer. The paper was stiff, formal. It warned me not to contact Elena or interfere with her new family's affairs. It accused me of harassment, of emotional disturbance. It was signed at the bottom like I was some kind of threat to be neutralized. After everything I'd done, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every missed meal, they wanted to pretend I never existed. So I made one final choice. That night, I opened my safe and pulled out my will. It was one of the few things I kept updated over the years, just in case. For decades, Elena had been listed as the sole beneficiary. Everything I owned, my house, my retirement account, the small fund I'd put aside for her kids one day, was hers. But not anymore. I took a pen, and I removed her name. I stared at that blank line for a long time. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even heartbroken anymore. I was just done. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. But just when I thought it was all over, just when I had finally started to accept the silence, my phone rang again. This time I recognized the number. It was hers. Elena. I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen and I could already feel my throat closing. I answered. At first, she didn't say anything. I just heard her breathing, sharp, uneven. Then finally her voice cracked through the line. "Mama," she whispered, almost like she was afraid to say it out loud. I didn't respond. I couldn't. "I think I made a mistake." She was crying. Hard. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Diane said it would be easier without all the emotion. She said it would keep things peaceful." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But I feel trapped. I can't post pictures without Diane approving them. I can't even go to brunch with Tara unless I ask Marcus first. I thought I was choosing stability, but I feel like I don't even belong in my own life anymore." She sobbed. "I miss you." And just like that, all the walls I had been building inside started to shake. I didn't say I forgave her. I didn't say I understood. But I listened. Because even after everything, she was still my daughter. Still the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest when the world felt too big. And in that moment, I realized something painful, but real. Sometimes the ones we raise can break us in ways no stranger ever could, and sometimes they come back, not as the people we remember, but as the ones finally ready to understand what love really costs. After everything, the silence, the betrayal, the legal threats, she didn't fall apart. She could have. She could have stayed in bed for weeks, clutching the scrapbook she had meant to give her daughter on her wedding day. She could have played every memory on repeat, the birthdays, the late-night phone calls, the whispered promises of, "I'll always need you, Mama." But she didn't. Something broke inside her the moment she saw her daughter through that glass. Laughing, radiant, untouched by the devastation outside, and though it shattered her, that crack, it also let the light in. So she got up. She didn't rush into healing. No. Healing isn't glamorous. It's not a quick fix or a bounce back. It's slow, clumsy, quiet. She started with therapy. Just one appointment, she told herself, just to say she tried. She didn't even speak during that first session. She sat stiffly, polite smile, hands folded like she was waiting in line at the DMV, but the therapist didn't press. She just waited. And in that silence, something inside the mother began to shift. The next session, she whispered one sentence. Then the next, she cried. And slowly, week after week, she breathed. Her next decision wasn't about her daughter. It wasn't about the past. It was about her. She began hiking, alone, no music, no distractions. Just the sound of gravel underfoot, her breath, and the wind through trees that had stood for hundreds of years, untouched by human drama. Each step was a reclamation, a way of saying, I am still here. She bought a notebook, a simple one from the dollar store, and she began to write, not poems or stories, but truths, her truths, not who she had been for others, but who she was when nobody needed her. She joined a local gardening club. She didn't know the first thing about perennials or soil acidity, but she needed somewhere to go where no one looked at her with pity. There she met Joyce. Joyce was older, wiser, with a voice like warm tea and eyes that seemed to know things before they were said. They talked about tulips and tomatoes at first, but soon they talked about children, about disappointment, about starting over at 60 when you thought your story had already been written. One afternoon, Joyce handed her a small potted seedling and said, "This one's fussy. It won't bloom unless you talk to it. Every day, just like us." She smiled, took the pot home, and talked to it. And for the first time in months, maybe even years, she felt alive. She baked a cake, not for a birthday, not for a celebration, just for herself. It was chocolate, rich, simple. She sat at the kitchen table, sliced a piece, poured a glass of red wine, and didn't share it with anyone. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, but it was everything. Later that week, she opened an old shoebox full of photos. There was Elena, age 6, grinning in a pink tutu. There was the two of them, arms around each other at high school graduation. So many memories, so much love. But love, she'd learned, doesn't always mean safety, and memories don't always make good anchors. Sometimes they drown you. So she did what she never thought she could. She lit a fire, and one by one, she let them go. Not in anger, but in release. And then, the letter. Pages of handwritten truth. She poured every word she had swallowed over the years onto that paper. The pain, the betrayal, the longing, the love that still lived, aching and alive, even now. She folded it, sealed it, tucked it into the drawer beside her bed. But she never mailed it, because that letter wasn't for her daughter. It was for her. A marker in the soil. Proof that she had made it through the storm, that she had given everything and survived the silence that came after, that she could still bloom. Not as someone's mother, not as someone's fallback plan, not as a footnote in someone else's story, but as herself, rooted, resilient, and finally, free. It had been almost 9 months. 9 months since the wedding, 9 months since the silence, 9 months since she stood on the front porch with a wrapped scrapbook in her hands, turned away like a stranger at her own daughter's ceremony. In that time, the mother hadn't once heard her voice, not through a call, not even a forwarded message from some mutual friend. It was as though her only child had vanished behind a wall built out of betrayal and pride. And then, just after dusk, on an ordinary Wednesday evening, a knock. At first she didn't move. She'd trained herself not to expect anything, no surprises, no second chances, No one shows up after this long unless they want something. But the knock came again. Softer this time, almost apologetic. She opened the door and everything in her chest tightened. There she was, her daughter, but not the version she remembered. The smiling bride swept up in white satin and family photos. No. This woman looked weathered. Her makeup was smudged, eyes red-rimmed, hair thrown into a careless bun. Her clothes were wrinkled, mismatched, as if she'd thrown them on in a hurry or hadn't cared for days. The mother stood in the doorway, silent, and the daughter, once so headstrong, so sure of herself, spoke in a voice so fragile it was barely a whisper. I didn't know where else to go. She didn't beg to come in. She didn't make excuses. She just stood there, raw, beaten down. And for a moment, the mother's heart cracked open again, the way only a mother's heart can. But this time, she didn't rush to fix it. She didn't throw her arms open or speak the words, "Come here, baby." She stepped back quietly. An invitation. Nothing more. They sat at the kitchen table. No candles, no tea. Just silence and the hum of a ticking clock. And slowly, the daughter began to speak. At first it was disjointed, fragments, then confessions. She talked about the mother-in-law, how the woman had slowly taken over everything, the house, the finances, even her friendships, how she felt constantly scrutinized, controlled. She talked about the husband, the coldness that replaced his charm, how his affection faded once the cameras stopped rolling, how he would call her too emotional, too weak, or just like your mother. She admitted she had shut her own mother out because she was afraid of facing the truth, because her mother had warned her, because deep down she'd known all along that her mother was right. Her voice trembled, her hands shook. But the mother stayed quiet, not out of anger, not out of spite, but because for the first time in her life she understood something powerful. Just because someone is sorry doesn't mean they're ready. And when her daughter finally fell silent, when the air between them thickened with regret and uncertainty, she looked up with tear-filled eyes and said, "I want to come home. I want us back." The mother inhaled slowly, and then, for the first time that evening, she spoke. Her voice was calm, not cold, not cruel, but unmistakably different. "I will always love you. That hasn't changed, but I'm no longer a place where you can drop your pain and leave without picking up the pieces." It wasn't anger that guided her words. It was clarity, years of sacrifice, years of being overlooked, dismissed, manipulated, and still showing up. She had finally learned that love without boundaries is a blueprint for self-destruction. The daughter's chin trembled. "So that's it? After everything, we can't fix it?" The mother rose from her chair, not rushed, not dramatic. She walked over to the drawer in the hallway, opened it carefully, and pulled out a white envelope. She handed it to her daughter. "Read this when you're ready," she said softly, "but don't read it looking for comfort. Read it looking for a mirror." Inside, just one line, a single sentence written in neat, confident handwriting. Respect is love in action. Not just a phrase, a boundary, a vow to herself. A door that would only open again if the woman in front of her was willing to come through it honestly. There was no shouting, no breakdown, no dramatic goodbye. Just two women, one seeking redemption, the other standing firmly in self-respect. And as her daughter walked away, letter clutched in hand, the mother closed the door quietly behind her. No slam, just a soft click. Because this time, she wasn't closing the door to punish. She was closing it to protect everything she had rebuilt, her peace, her power, her worth. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something more honest than what they'd ever had before. Not a reunion, but a reckoning. And it started with a single knock. The forest was quiet. A gentle mist clung to the leaves as birds called softly in the distance. And there, walking along the narrow trail, her footsteps light on the damp earth, was the mother. In her hands, a small cake, plain, unfrosted, wrapped in a napkin like an offering to no one but herself. The kind of thing she once would have baked for a birthday, or an apology. But this time, it wasn't a gesture for someone else. It was a symbol, a pause, a moment reclaimed. As she moved deeper into the trees, her face calm, the narration slowed, letting the silence speak. I used to think that motherhood meant giving. Giving until your hands were empty, until your voice was gone, until there was nothing left but sacrifice. She stops at a clearing where the trees part gently to let the sun pour through. She breathes in, long and steady. But I've learned that real love, the kind that lasts, starts with loving yourself. She sets the cake down on a tree stump, an altar of sorts, not to mourn, but to mark a new beginning. And the rain that day, it wasn't rejection, it wasn't punishment, it was a cleansing, a washing away of old roles, old wounds, and old expectations. She stands there for a while, watching the sunlight catch in the dew on the grass, and for the first time in a long time, she smiles, not because everything was perfect, but because, finally, she was. Now let me ask you something. If your own child chose a stranger over you, turned their back on everything you built together, what would you have done? Would you have stayed, fought harder, begged for a seat at their new table? Or would you have walked away? Was this mother wrong for drawing the line, or was this her liberation? Tell us below, because your voice matters. And if this story moved you, if it stirred something real in your heart, tap the like button to show you were here. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that speak to the soul, because sometimes the most powerful love story is the one where you finally choose yourself.